to this. Yes, that very dramatic intro says that it's Eye on the World with Paul Buchanan. Thanks very much to the 36-parallel.com co-founder Paul Buchanan with us. Morning, Paul. And today we are looking at Summit of the Americas that recently took place. And just to set the scene with that, I want to play this little clip here.
On Sunday, the President held a joint press conference with President Santos, where they announced the U.S.-Colombian Free Trade Agreement would take effect May 15th, which is expected to increase American exports by more than $1 billion and create or support thousands of jobs all across America.
This summit ended last week, and Paul Buchanan, interested to get your thoughts on how the summit went down.
Well, it didn't go down well at all. Now, I'm very glad to say that although the first clip that you showed a bunch of armed people running around, it didn't descend to the level of an armed conflict between the parties. But as far as summits of chief of states go, this was an abysmal failure. And that raises some very interesting questions, both regards to the Western Hemisphere and international community relations in general. What basically happened is every 3 years there is a Summit of the Americas in which the heads of state of all the Western Hemisphere, with the exception of Cuba, come together for essentially a talk fest. And the important business that occurs amongst business leaders who are invited onto the entourages of the leaders. Then there's a lot of bilateral ministerials that go on the sidelines, but none of that is formalized. The formal proceedings are the heads of state and their conference. And in this particular year, things went terribly wrong for two reasons in particular. First of all, the Argentine president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, arrived and tried to table a resolution where the summit would recognize Argentina's claims to sovereignty over the Malvinas Falkland Islands. And she probably would not have done that in previous years, but it's an election year in Argentina. It's the 30th anniversary of the Falklands War, and so she thought she would table it. And it was rejected summarily. And she was upset by the summary rejection, and the rejection, mind you, was led by the United States. And she upped and left. She didn't even hang around for the final dinner. In fact, she didn't hang around for the final day. She left, which, of course, is a tremendous breach of protocol. But she went out shouting that basically Argentina was not going to be disrespected in that manner. On top of that, the majority of the Latin American countries tabled a resolution that would allow Cuba to rejoin the Organization of American States and to rejoin the Summit of Americas after 50 years of exclusion. And the United States, once again, this time backed by Canada, vetoed that resolution. So Cuba will continue to be excluded. And from then on, downhill, any resolution was vetoed by other sides. What the United States wanted, the others did not want. I should point out that Hugo Chavez was not there. He's very sick. And even though the meeting was held in Cartagena, Colombia, and the listeners may have heard about the Secret Service prostitution scandal that occurred on the sidelines. Again, more woe and more misery added to this event. But at the end of the day, nothing got done. People left in a very acrimonious way. Obama's interest in the region was very clear that was extremely weak, and that the United States was going to play an obstructionist role. And that tells us a lot about the state of Western Hemispheric affairs, and I will simply say this to conclude. The Latin Americans are feeling more independent today than they have felt in well over 100 years, and the reason for that is quite simple. The United States is declining as an influence in the Western Hemisphere, and China, once again, is rising. China is now the second biggest trade partner in Latin America, closing in on the United States. It's the second biggest investment partner, again, closing in on the United States. It has interests in virtually every country in Latin America, and because the Chinese are there, Latin Americans have now more flexibility in their relationships with the United States, which essentially for a Latin American means the ability to say no. And I should say that I have a personal interest in all of this because I was raised in Latin America, particularly Argentina, Brazil, and Chile.
Right.
And so I'm well aware of, it's not a thirst for revenge, but it's a sentiment amongst Latins that for the first time in a very long time, they can stand up to the United States because they feel strong and confident enough that they have international backing for such a position.
So while the States has less of an influence there, what does it also say about these kind of events, these sort of summits? You know, we see the Climate Change Summit, we see the Americas Summit, we see the Asia Summit. Are these things actually useful?
No, they are not. And I appreciate the question because what we get is a lot of so-called summitry. In fact, here in the Pacific, we have a glaring example of these sort of talk fests that do nothing in the form of the Pacific Island Forum annual meetings. The last one was held in Auckland last September. Quite frankly, anytime you get heads of states together in a social setting, they're more interested in the blah, 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 and not in the hard details. And so people pontificate, people talk about grandiose ambitions and world peace and unity, and they give each other group hugs. But quite frankly, nothing gets done. And the reason this should be a worry to taxpayers in every country is that we fund these summits. These summits now have bureaucracies built into them whose sole purpose in life is to get ready for the next summit and make it as extravagant as possible. You may remember the APEC summits. Everybody always wears funky clothes. There's always a theme with the native dress of some place.
Yeah.
This is in no way conducive to addressing the hard challenges of the international community, even on subject areas like climate change, and we know that climate change conferences do not go well at all. So I would argue that the value of a summit is in the hidden business that gets done on the sidelines of the summit, but that raises its own problems precisely because it's hidden. It's not transparent. It's not open to public or media scrutiny. And so God knows what goes on the margins of summits like this, although if you're hanging out with the U.S. Secret Service, you can be assured that what's going on the margins is unsavory.
Indeed. Summits sound like a Miss Universe contest, really. Paul Buchanan, 36-parallel.com, as you'll find more discussion on this and also video of this up at livenews.co.nz.